last, right? And Professor Nicola Henry will be the last presenter.
Okay. Hopefully I'll still be awake.
And Rob Spector will be the second to the. Will he be around?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
You want to check
I'm just sending him an email. He's just sent another email, and I'm just sending him the screenshot of how to get on.
So he doesn't know how to get on?
No, he's still confused, I think.
I sent an email to him, but
I'm just sending him an email again with the screenshot and the link to this particular meeting.
Okay, so just in case Rob couldn't show up or he has technical difficulty, but actually he's technician. I mean, maybe he just doesn't have the link or something. So Kevin is checking up with him right now. So we'll just start, okay? So, and the first will be Fang Jun, and the second will be Professor Xia Zhang, and the third one will be the President Hyung-hee Son, and the fourth will be Gail, Professor Dines, and the last one will be Professor Henry. Okay, that's the order of our presentation. Okay, so shall we start now? Okay. Greeting everyone. It's my great honor to host this virtual forum. The forum is about how to cope with, actually the forum is about the growing trend of digital violence against women and girls. And the forum is initiated by Women in Digital Initiative in Taiwan. Actually, just during the COVID-19, UN Women released a report addressing about the situation, the online and ICT facilitated violence against women and girls during COVID-19 is actually rampant. So it's in urgent need that we all get together and cope with this situation, try to figure out the strategies. This panel today will be full of expert thoughts and real experiences, real cases, and I think the technical, the strategic tips how to cope with this type of global crime. So let me introduce you the first presenter. Our first presenter is Ms. Fang Jun Zhu, and she's from Taiwan, and she's the chairperson of WIDI, Women in Digital Initiative in Taiwan. She's also the head of legal research and legal affairs department of the Legal Aid Foundation, also the attorney at law. So let's welcome Fang Jun Zhu, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so it's really my pleasure to talk about cyber violence, the framework of the cyber violence today. And this is our great opportunity to share with you what we experience in Taiwan. So let's share my screen first. Please wait for me. Sure. I hope you'll see my screen. Yeah. Okay. So I want to introduce you a little bit about WIDI. WIDI is an advocacy group aiming to eliminate all forms of gender-based violence in Taiwan, especially cyber violence against women. WIDI boasts members from different fields, attorneys at law, like myself, scholars, and social workers, etc. Gender-based cyber violence is already a serious issue around the world. Thus, many organizations already give close attention to this issue and conduct comprehensive research, like Association of Progressive Communication under UN Women, EU Parliament, and so on. On the slide, you can see the definition of gender-based cyber violence by APC and CEDAW. For example, from APC, it says acts of gender-based violence that are committed, abetted, or aggravated in part or fully by the use of information and communication technologies, ICTs, such as mobile phones, the internet, social media platforms, and emails. And in 2020, the Economist Intelligence Unit, affiliated with the magazine Economist, completed another new research on prevalence of online violence against women among top 51 countries by the number of persons online. As the graphic shows, the prevalence of cyber violence against women is alarmingly high, and there's regional differences. Like we can see in Africa, the prevalence is 90%, and even worse in the Middle East, it's 98. Okay, so WIDI has been observing all forms of cyber violence based on gender, along with our experience helping the victims, and trying to present them in an organized way to yield strategies combating different forms of offenses. The 5 strategies of gender-based cyber violence by WIDI are privacy violations, abuse of images, other sexual harassment and assault, ICT-related human trafficking, and hate speech and behavior. It is a non-exhaustive list of many forms of cyber violence online against women, an attempt to paint a comprehensive picture of the phenomenon. The line between the categories can sometimes be vague due to different definitions of the same terms among different entities, or for strategic reasons for advocacy. For example, abuse of private images can also be a form of privacy violation at the same time, of course. But to address the seriousness of image abuse, we made it one of the 5 categories. Under each category, I'm going to introduce to you the tactics of events we know. So let's start from gender-based violence. Under this category, we have doxing, upskirting, hacking, stealing data, cyber stalking, IoT-related intimate partner violence, identity theft, and impersonation. The definition of doxing can refer to publishing anyone's information online, or can apply specifically to uncovering the real person behind an anonymous handle or username and exposing them online. Doxing attacks usually involve harassment and revenge. One example of gender-based doxing in Taiwan is a famous bulletin board system called PTT, which was established by students in National Taiwan University in 1995. There is a section on PPT called Beauty, shown here at the left-hand side of the slide. Users used to post personal information about good-looking students from all departments of NTU, like their grades, relationships, gender orientations, and so on. Due to the privacy issue, nowadays, Beauty has rules to ban posts of private information and rules to delete photos on the demand of people discussed in the section. It shows how people learn to regulate users on the internet. Doxing is multifaceted, and its legality is determined on a case-by-case basis. In Taiwan, while there are no laws against finding publicly available information and compiling or publishing it, there are other crimes that doxers can be charged for, like offenses against Personal Data Protection Act in Taiwan, depending on the nature of the case. And next is upskirting. Upskirting is the practice of taking non-consensual photographs under a person's skirt or kilt, capturing an image of the crotch area, underwear, and sometimes genitalia. The most commonly used devices are spy cameras and cell phone cameras. In some countries, there is legislation against this kind of offense. For example, in Taiwan, upskirting could be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 3 years, short-term imprisonment, or a fine no more than 300,000 NTD. That's about 10,000 USD, according to the Criminal Code Article 315-1. However, the result of most verdicts are usually a fine. Next is hacking and stealing data. This kind of offense is already a known way of cyber violence. It could be a tactic used with other forms of cyber violence. And the next is cyber stalking. According to the study, cyber violence and hate speech online against women by EU Parliament, cyber stalking is the action of spying, fixating, or compiling information about somebody online and to communicate with them against their will. In Taiwan, we still have a long way to go before we can provide enough prevention and protection for victims. Taiwan's restrictive order under Domestic Violence Prevention Act can only apply to family members, ex-spouses, or partners who used to live or are living together. That means when it's an acquaintance or a suitor, we don't have legal preventive intervention to protect our victims. On the slide is a photo of a press conference held by NGOs and legislators advocating legislation of protection from Stalking and Harassment Act. Next is IoT-related intimate partner violence. Internet of Things, for short, is IoT, refers to a wide variety of devices with different purposes, functions, and capabilities. IoT devices may be connected and controlled through internet, Bluetooth, or other means, making them practical and efficient tools that can improve quality of life. The devices are commonly in homes or worn as an accessory, like smart appliances, smart home systems, and wearable items. You can see the examples on the slides. In 2017, 29 million homes in the United States had some smart technology, according to a report by McKinsey, which estimated that the number was growing by 31% a year. That's significant. However, IoT devices can be misused. According to NY Times report in 2018, women in San Francisco called into the help hotlines and domestic violence shelters said they felt as if they were going crazy. One woman had turned on her air conditioner, but said it then switched off without her touching it. Another said the code numbers of the digital lock at her front door changed every day, and she could not figure out why. Still another told an abuse helpline that she kept hearing the doorbell ring, but no one was there. Investigating IoT abuse can be challenging since devices can be used to remotely harass or threaten victims. Oh, full screen. Okay. Next is identity theft impersonation. Impersonation or identity theft is the process of stealing someone's identity so as to threaten or intimidate, as well as to discredit or damage a user's reputation. The most common tactic is to create an account with the other person's name and photo. One of my clients used to be involved romantically with a married man for a short period of time, and his wife defamed her by creating an account on Facebook with my client's name, posting defamatory words, and sending texts to my client's friends. She was a college student and was deeply traumatized by this situation. So she filed a lawsuit. Next part is abuse of images. Under this category, we have non-consensual dissemination of private sexual images, sextortion, and AI and ML misuses and abuses. First part is non-consensual dissemination of private sexual images. For victims, this could be the most devastating offense among all forms of cyber violence. The popular term is revenge porn. In Taiwan, Taiwan has been lack of statistics and comprehensive research on cyber violence against women and girls. One of the few research conducted on this was held by Taipei Women's Rescue Foundation in 2015. As the statistics show, only 5% of the victims are over 40 years old. And consistent with other foreign research, most perpetrators are known intimately by the victims. As for the motivation of the perpetrators, as far as the victims knew, 16% are for revenge and 16% are for getting back together with the victims. And the top 3 platforms of distribution are Facebook, various porn sites, and Line. Since last year, Pornhub parent company MindGeek has been hit with a massive 600 million class action lawsuit, accusing it of hosting child porn videos on the website. Later, Pornhub and MindGeek were sued again in the Southern District of California for violating the Trafficking Victims Protection Act by making millions of dollars streaming videos produced by Girls Do Porn, a website. Pornhub claims that victims of non-consensual porn can easily request to remove videos from the site, and that those videos can be fingerprinted. Broadly speaking, video fingerprinting is a method for software to identify and then summarize characteristic components or metadata of a video, allowing that video to be uniquely identified by its fingerprint. But an investigation finds this system can be easily and quickly bypassed with minor editing. Pornhub's current method for removing non-consensual porn not only puts the burden of finding and flagging videos almost entirely on the already traumatized victims. Those victims can't even rely on the system to work perfectly. The case of Pornhub demonstrates how hard it is to remove the private images or videos online. Victims in Taiwan face great difficulties deleting the images before they are distributed and have no immediate and convenient solution to remove images and videos once they're online, like all victims around the world. Websites and search engines are often slow to respond. To tackle the problem, Ministry of Health and Welfare in Taiwan commissioned the Institute of Watch Internet Network, or we call it iWing, to take the complaints of victims and help them talk to websites or social media. iWing is a government-funded organization, but it's not law enforcement. Only images or videos of minors are mandatory to be removed by law. According to Remedies' experience, once the private images or videos are online or threatened to be posted online, the victims fall into desperation and depression. They might hurt themselves and even attempt suicide. And though the act of dissemination is punishable by criminal code, the charge is distribution of obscene objects, not the protection of personal privacy. So the article was passed at least 5 decades ago by the legislator to protect the morality of the society, not the violation of privacy. So we argue that revision is needed. And although the offenses are punishable by criminal code, lack of mandatory procedural protection during legal process might traumatize the victims even more. For example, during investigation by public prosecutors, the victims and defendants could be questioned in the same small interrogation room, even sit right next to each other. This could be avoided if the victim's attorneys communicate with the prosecutors of office beforehand. However, oftentimes the victims are not represented by attorneys and don't know what will happen in prosecutor's office. And I believe Professor Gildines will share with us later today how victims are traumatized by this kind of offenses. Looking forward to it. And while individual efforts can help with immediate damage control, coordinated multi-stakeholder action is necessary for systematic change. As far as we know, at least Canada, the Great Britain, Japan, the Philippines, Israel, France, South Korea, New Zealand, and Malta has legislation against this kind of offenses. And many other countries are advocating for the change. Taiwan hopes to learn from other countries. And I would like to talk a little about sextortion. Sextortion is short for sexualized extortion. Sextortion takes on different forms, but at its core, it is the threat of exposed sexual images in order to make person to do something. And now we see the latest form of offense, AI and ML misuses and abuses. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are powerful technologies. However, they could be misused. And for the victims, that's disastrous. For example, Deep Nude. In June 2019, a downloadable Windows and Linux application called Deep Nude was released to remove clothing from images of women. Dissemination of deep nude images or using them as means of coercion no doubt have a negative impact on victims professionally or personally. And next is deepfake. Another popular abuse of AI are deepfakes, which involve the use of AI techniques to craft or manipulate audio and visual content for these to appear authentic. A combination of deep learning and fake media, deepfakes are perfectly suited for use in future disinformation campaigns because they are difficult to immediately differentiate it from legitimate content, even with the use of technological solutions. Because of the wide use of the internet and social media, deepfakes can reach millions of individuals in different parts of the world. In Taiwan, many celebrities and YouTubers their faces are used in deepfake porns. Most victims choose not to report to the police because they worry about making the fakes even more popular and further revenge by the filmmakers. And other cyber sexual harassment and assault that include cyber flashing, sending obscene texts, sounds, images, virtual reality groping. Cyber flashing is a crime which involves sending obscene pictures to strangers through airdrop. The abuse of cyber flashing is common in public transportation. From 2017 to 2018, we found news of abuse of airdrop from New York, the UK, and Australia. On the slide, we see a typical case in Taiwan, 2020. The victim had received an airdrop notice named Tips on Preventing COVID-19, and she clicked it to find it was an image of male genitalia. The distribution of obscene images is criminal offenses in Taiwan, so the victim reported it to the police. However, like other victims worldwide, the police told her it's very hard to trace the perpetrators. And about virtual reality groping, simply put, it's a cyber violation in the virtual reality world. As the gaming world advances, women are facing the same physical threats online as offline. As virtual reality technology becomes more immersive, the line between our real bodies and our digital bodies begin to blur. According to the victims, the psychological trauma was about equal. The shock they felt from real life groping versus that first virtual groping was about the same. And next is ICT related human trafficking. This trafficking of women using technology means is common for now, such as recruitment, luring women into prostitution and share stolen graphic content to advertise for prostitution. The notorious Telegram nth room incident happened during 2018 to March 2020 in South Korea, shocked the world. Our representative from KCLV RXC will share this more in detail. Next is gender-based hate speech and behavior. Sexist hate speech is defined as expressions which spread, incite, promote, or justify hatred based on sex. For example, posting and sharing violent content consists of portraying women as sexual objects or targets of violence, using sexist and insulting comments, abusing women for expressing their own views and for turning away sexual advances, or pushing women to commit suicide. Here you can see on the slide are examples in Taiwan. It says, don't have a crush on her, rape her, and Taiwanese girl needs to be beaten, and so on. And a famous incident about hate speech in Taiwan happened in 2017. Professor Xie will share this later with us, so I'll be brief here. Thank you for your time. Looking forward to the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Fang Jun. Actually, we, the NGO here in Taiwan, engage scholars, experts, other NGOs to develop this two-layered 5 categories and 21 subcategories in total. So I'm quite sure all the participants and the audiences will have a lot of questions about these categorizations. We'll come back to this later. Now we have our second presenter, Professor Xia Zhang. Okay, the slides, please. Yeah, okay, thank you. Professor Xie is the member of Taiwan Nurses Association, and she is now associate professor at School of Nursing, College of Nursing, National Taipei University of Nursing and Health Sciences. Her topic today, she will use real cases to showcase online sexual harassment and gender-based online hate speech nurses' experiences here in Taiwan in the action Taiwan Nurses Association take. Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, just wait me a moment. Let me open my slide. Yeah, but I have a problem about the screen. Yeah, let me share my screen. Okay. Yeah. Good day, everyone. I'm honored to have this opportunity to be with all of you. I have traveled to New York 4 years ago to participate in the CSW 16 It is tributary meaningful to me that we can come together during a pandemic to discuss the gender equality and the women's rights movements that are currently being promoted in countries all over the world. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. I'm a nurse, a member of Taiwan Nurse Association. Also, I'm a faculty of nursing at NTU NHS. Yeah. I want to talk about a real cyberbullying instance, a real case to explain a case of sexual harassment in a virtual awareness in Taiwan 2017. Share what action our nursing team took and provide some policy recommendation. This is my outline. That has 3 parts. The photo is from CSW 4 years ago. This case about online sexual harassment. A man influencer posted a selfie video on YouTube that showed him alleged interaction with nurse at a hospital. In this video, he verbally abused the nurse by making discriminatory, hateful remarks at them. Okay, and some embarrassing words, just like slide displayed on the screen. A lot of internet news have reported that event. And this situation, the video went virtual and was widely covered by news media outlets, sparking mass outrage among the nurses. We experienced the harassment through watching the video, and several nurses feared for defamation at the time. At the same time, a clinical nurse served on front lines showed that she feels sexually harassed, bullied, scared, and stripped of dignity after watching the video. She also began experiencing hostile in workplace and society. She developed persistent insomnia and the inappropriate words and absence expressed of the enforcer often appears in her mind. And this video severely hide her ability to work and negatively impact her life. She therefore fear a complaint, a legal proceeding of sexual harassment at her local police station under the Act. But the video continued to circulate online and continued to cause sexual harassment harm. And hostile environment. Learners Association had requested YouTube to remove the video from its platform. As Google is an overseas company, and the request was to no vote. Furthermore, our government organization, NCC, expressed that inappropriate video and the language on the internet are beyond the scope of its jurisdiction. Therefore, it has no power to restrain the video or request its removed. This is a typical case. In this example, the enforcing intentionally create a hostile environment in a virtual space using absence words, action, and image. Our team member, our nurse, watch the video feel violent. The enforcer knows use words and action to create a hostile environment of gender discrimination and sexual harassment. Although the video did not target a special person, social complaints and technology advancements have made people more susceptible to the negative caused by gender discrimination than before. And the internet amplified the effects of the video. Our government's currently legislation purpose is persist to promote the Sexual Harassment Prevention Act and eliminate sexual harassment in any shape or form. Our aim to eliminate all form of discrimination against women as outlined in the CEDAW. Regarding this instance, this event, our association, Taiwan Nurse Association, launched a nationwide movement to defend nurse dignity, fight against online sexual harassment, and reject gender discrimination. And this movement rolled through 5,000 people only in 3 days. And we also helped to organize a press conference at the registration year to urge our campaign authority to value this issue. When dealing with online sexual harassment, especially hate speech, the authority responsibility for enforcing the Sexual Harassment Prevention Act, our government organization, the Ministry of Health and Welfare, should be bound by duty to enforce the act. And a clear definition must be published, and the legal provision of the Sexual Harassment Prevention Act must be enforced. As present, the freedom to spread video and opinions online had led to the creation of hostile environment. The negative impact of this environment are such as those of previous channel. Countries with weak sexual harassment law and legislation and the rampant internet law must take an aggressive step against bullying and hate speech. Because we all know that gender equality is a fundamental human right. It is also close correlation to people's physical and mental well-being. Penalty and regulation must be introduced to deter discrimination against special groups and compensate for criminal law loopholes. Legal agency can also assume a more active role to ensure the enforcement of the CEDAW. We actively pursue a friendly and inclusive environment free of gender discrimination, prejudice, and gender-based violence. Let me summarize the important conclusion. All people deserve to live in a fair and just environment, both physically and virtually. Let us working together to not only resolve the issue of virtual gender violence, but also give our nurses the confidence their duty as care providers and protectors of people. This is a real case, and this is my talk, our experience. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Professor Xie. Thank you. I just want to make sure the sound effect is okay. So can everybody hear the voice clearly? I just want to make sure the sound effect is okay. Can everybody hear the voice clearly? Okay, seems to be okay. So our next presenter will be Professor Gail Dinas. Gail, are you here? Hello, Professor Gail Dinas. Just want to make sure Professor Gail Dinas is here. Hello, Professor Gail Dinas, are you here? Okay, maybe let's go to next presenter and maybe get back to Professor Gail Dinas when she's back. Okay. So President Song-Hee Seo, can you give presentation now? Is it okay for you to give presentation first? Okay. Thank you. President Song-Hee Seo is the president of Korean Cyber Sexual Violence Response Center. She will talk about the Telegram sexual exploitation case in the legislative situation in Korea. And we have interpreter Ziyuan Li from Taiwan, and she's the exchange student now based in Seoul. So thank you, President Seo. Can you, floor is yours, okay? Thank you.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 한국 사이버 성폭력 대응센터에서 활동하는 서승이라고 합니다.
Hi everyone, I'm from Korea Cyber Sexual Violence Response Center and I'm the president Seo.
오늘 제가 발표드릴 내용은 텔레그램 성착취 사건과 한국의 법 개정 현황입니다.
Today I'm going to talk about the Telegram sexual exploitation case and the legislative situation in Korea.
저희 단체를 간단히 소개드리자면 저희 단체는 사이버 공간 내 성폭력 문제를 해결하기 위해 활동하고 있고요. 2015년부터 시작된 한국의 페미니즘 리부트 물결 속에서 활동하고 있는 2030 세대의 단체입니다.
So I would like to introduce our organization first. And our organization is the feminism NGO and strives to solve the problems occurred in the cyberplace. And we are established by 20s and 30s age group after 2015 when feminism was rebooted in Korea.
네, 이제 N번방 사건에 대한 소개 그리고 저희가 분석하는 사이버 성폭력 구조에 대해서 얘기해 보도록 하겠습니다.
So we are going to talk about the F-room case and the structure of the cyber violence.
2020년 한국에는 텔레그램 성착취 사건이 알려지면서 많은 사람들이 관심을 갖고 분노했습니다. 한국에는 국민청원이라는 제도가 있어서 20만 명이 넘는 사람이 온라인에서 서명을 하면 정부가 답변을 해야 합니다.
In 2020, the Telegram case occurred in Korea, and many people started to follow the case and become brave. In Korea, there's a system of so-called public petition. If over 200,000 people signed online, the government should reply.
텔레그램 성착취 가해자들을 신상 공개해야 된다는 국민청원이 200만 명을 넘기면서 역대 최고의 서명 숫자를 기록했습니다.
And there's a petition demanding the police to publicize the end-room suspects. And 2 million people signed the petition. And this is also the greatest number in the petition history.
네, 텔레그램 성착취 방은 2020년 초 기준으로 저희가 모니터링 했을 때 약 100개가 넘게 운영됐는데 그중에 핵심적인 조직은 박사의 박사방, 운영자 각각의 N번방이라고 할 수 있습니다.
So the end group, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Sorry, can you hear me?
Ziyuan, it's not clear. It's not clear. Please.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going.
Speak word by word, okay?
Okay.
And project your voice toward the microphone.
Okay, sorry. So
Thank you.
The nth room is we're going to talk about the nth room, and the nth room is started from 2020, and it's almost over 200 of chat room. And in the court, the most important criminals are the doctor. The doctor operate the doctor room, and God operate the nth room.
네, 그리고 박사방의 피해자는 약 70명, N번방의 피해자는 약 50명 이상으로 파악되었습니다.
And there are 70 victims of doctor's room and 50 victims of the nth room.
텔레그램 성착취 가해자들은 피해자의 약점을 만들고 그것을 이용해서 협박을 하면서 성적 촬영물을 갈취했습니다.
The criminals of Telegram sexual exploitation actually made the victims into witness and take advantage of those weaknesses in order to threaten victims to take sexual videos or images.
그리고 조직적으로 온라인 성착취 가해자들은 피해자를 노예라고 부르면서 관리했습니다.
They even called the victims offline to rape them and again film the progress as video. And they organized online sexual exploitation criminals and called the victims as slave and management.
오프라인에서 불러서 강간을 하고 그것을 다시 촬영해서 유통하거나 피해자들의 영상물을 판매하면서 수익을 올렸습니다.
So they call the victims offline to rape them.
Ziyuan,
Yeah.
Excuse me, we cannot hear your voice clearly. Is it possible for you to take off the mask?
Yes.
If not, yeah. So please, because your voice is not clear, audiences, participants jot on the chat board saying that the English is way too low. So please raise your voice.
Okay. Sorry for the inconvenience. So they even call the victims offline to rape them and again film the progress as video in order to sell and get profit. Is this volume all right? 답이 없이.
Now it's better. It's better.
Thank you.
저희 단체는 촬영물을 이용한 성폭력이 산업구조 그리고 문화구조로 구성되어 있다고 분석하고 있습니다. 성착취 영상물을 사고 팔면서 만들어진 대규모 산업구조가 있고요. 그리고 성착취 영상물을 소비하는 문화, 피해자에 대한 문란한 여성이라고 낙인 찍는 문화입니다.
So our organization analyzes this film-based cyber violence into two kinds of composition. One is industrial structure, another is cultural structure. So in the industrial structure, people sell these videos, and in the cultural structure, people consume the videos and call victims promiscuous women.
이 그림은 카르텔 형식으로 연결된 산업 구조를 보여줍니다. 최초 촬영하고 공급을 하는 가해자들이 있고요. 이후에 다양한 플랫폼으로 유통되면서 수익이 창출되고 그리고 그 촬영물을 소비하는 사람들은 돈을 지불하면서 산업 구조를 지탱합니다.
This picture is the explanation in cartoon form about the sexual violence connect to each other. From the beginning, the criminals take the video and provide after that, and people spread the videos and gain profit. And then people pay money to consume them and support the industrial structure.
그리고 한국에서는 디지털 장의사가 피해자 여성들에게 돈을 받으면서 영상을 삭제해 주었는데 사실 이 유통 플랫폼 조직 하에 있었다는 것이 발각되기도 했습니다.
And also, digital funeral parlor means that they get money from victims to delete the videos, but the videos actually still spread through different platforms.
I'm sorry, Ziyuan, but we cannot hear your voice again either.
그래 잘해.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it could be better. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
어디부터 다시? So
디지털 장의사.
네. And also the digital funeral parlor means they get money from victims to delete the videos, but the videos actually still spread to different platforms. And which means that from a side, someone keep on spreading the videos, but another side, they get money from victims and delete the videos.
네, 대표적으로는 2018년에 공론화됐었던 웹하드 카르텔이 있습니다.
And the most representative case was the Webcard cartel occurred in 2018.
네, 이 사람들은 신상 공개된 텔레그램 성착취 사건의 가해자들입니다. 아주 젊은 남성들입니다.
These people are the Telegram sexual exploitation cases criminals. They received judgment to publicize their appearance, their faces. So they are very young.
텔레그램 성착취 사건을 통해서 우리가 알 수 있는 건 온라인 플랫폼의 발달과 보급으로 인해서 이전보다 점점 더 쉽게 사이버 성폭력 산업 구조를 기획할 수 있다는 것입니다. 아무런 물적 토대가 없는 남성들도 단기간 동안 몇 억의 수익을 올렸던 만큼 누구나 사이버 포주가 될 수 있는 세상이 되고 있습니다.
So we can know through the Telegram sexual exploitation case that due to the dissemination from internet and the development of platform, it is easier to plan a cyber sexual violence industrial structure. These men do not have any physical foundation, but they can earn 100 million profit in the crime. So it is a world that anyone can become a pimp.
텔레그램 성착취 방들을 모니터링하면서 우리는 사이버 성폭력 가해자들에게서 읽을 수 있는 키워드들이 변화했다고 분석했습니다.
We keep monitor the chat room and found out that the keywords the criminals use are different than before. In the cybersexual violence happened before, criminals don't mind hiding that they are actually.
이전에 사이버 성폭력 가해자들은 자신들이 자위를 하기 위한 성욕 해소를 위한 도구로 성착취 영상물들을 이용한다고 말했었습니다. 그런데 텔레그램 성착취 방 운영자 박사와 각갓은 여성들을 착취하는 행위 자체를 즐겨서 예쁜 여성들이 망가지는 게 좋아서 이와 같은 행위를 한다고 이야기했습니다.
So in the before cases of cyber sexual violence, the men, they were actually masturbating and demand the video to meet their sexual desire. But in the Telegram room, they enjoy women being raped and exploited. They want to see victims being ruined. So keywords such as conquer, slave, insult, disdain can be found in the chat room.
네, 젊은 남성들 사이에 여성 혐오의 방식과 키워드가 달라지고 그것이 성폭력에도 영향을 미치고 있습니다.
It is because between young men, the way of man or woman discussion and the keyword change, and then it gets impact on the sexual violence.
이 이미지는 텔레그램 성착취 방의 몇 부분을 캡처한 것입니다. 첫 번째는 본인이 촬영한 성착취 영상물을 인증해야 들어갈 수 있는 방 홍보 글입니다.
So this is the captured from the Telegram chat rooms. And the first, you can see from the left side, the chat room that required recognition of the sexual exploitation of Stalking, asking this is for the asking for the Stalking.
두 번째는 본인이 좋아하는 영상 스타일에 대한 투표인데 한국에서 만들어진 사이버 성폭력 영상에 대한 투표가 가장 높은 표를 얻었습니다.
And for the next image, you can see that it is asking for the favorite style, and they make them into the cyber sexual violence.
네, 세 번째 이미지는요. 이들이 성착취 영상물을 시청하는 것을 넘어서 어떤 피해자가 죽었거나 인생이 어떻게 망가졌는지 스토리를 지어내면서 피해자의 고통스러운 서사를 나누는 것을 즐겼다고 할 수 있겠습니다.
And besides, you can see they are watching the video and they even talk about how the victims being ruined and how the victim died.
이와 같은 텔레그램 성착취 사건에 한국의 NGO들은 연대체를 만들어 대응했습니다. 약 60개 정도의 여성단체가 함께하고 있으며 공동 변호인단을 만들어서 피해자를 지원하고 있습니다.
So in Korea, the NGOs get together and respond to the Telegram exploitation case. They even established the Telegram exploitation countermeasures committee. And the NGOs link up together, and there's almost about 50 sisters who tie up together. And then they provide common supports to victims and fight for issues and discuss policy and the legislative amendment.
네. 다음으로는 N번방 이후의 법 개정인데요. 필요하신 분이 있을까 싶어서 법조문을 그대로 실었기 때문에 글자가 굉장히 많기는 하지만 중요한 부분만 짚어서 이야기하겠습니다.
And now I'm going to talk about the amendment after the Andrew case. I thought that some of you would like to know the law articles, so the slides fill in words, but I'm just going to share the most important points.
Sorry, we cannot hear you.
그래서 안 된 거예요.
혹시 한국어는 들리고 있으신가요?
Can you hear Korean? But that is the same volume as I just think.
그렇게? 고개를 숙이고.
네.
그렇게 해보겠다고 해주세요.
네. So I think I will just look at in front, so the volume will just go up. Yeah.
한국에는 성폭력범죄 처벌법과 아동청소년 성보호법이 특별법으로 분리되어 있습니다. 그중에 성폭력 처벌법 14조는 촬영물을 이용한 성폭력을 처벌하는 가장 중요한 법률입니다.
So in Korea, there is the exception law associated with sexual violence crime punishment, and it is separate for the children and juvenile.
N번방 방지법 이전에도 이 법률은 3항으로 구성돼 있었는데요. 14조의 1항은 불법 촬영하면 처벌한다. 2항은 유포하면 처벌한다. 3항은 영리 목적으로 유포하면 처벌한다는 내용이고 각각 형량은 5년 이하 3천만 원 이하의 처벌 혹은 사망에 대해서는 7년 이하 처벌의 내용입니다.
But before the Anti-Room Prevention Act, the law was amended in 2018, and the paragraph 14, in the Article 14, the paragraph 1 is about the illegal film, and then it's going to be the 5 years imprisonment and 300,000 won. It's for the pay.
개정 전에는 처벌 가능한 유형이 제한적이기 때문에 산업구조에서 공급자 역할을 하는 촬영과 유포 행위에 대해서만 처벌할 수 있었습니다.
Before the amendment, the punishment was restrained, and only the provider role and the act of spreading get to be punished.
다음은 아동청소년 성보호법입니다. 11조에 아동청소년 이용 음란물의 제작 배포죄가 있습니다.
And the next is the law associated with the children and the juveniles. And in the Article 11, it's about the obscene materials production.
이 법률의 가장 큰 문제점은 음란물이라는 표현으로 해당 범죄가 성폭력이 아니라 음란물을 만들었기 때문에 처벌한다는 관점입니다.
The problem of this act is that it's because criminal produced the obscene materials and got punished, but not because the criminal commits sexual violence.
이제부터는 N번방 방지법 때 개정된 부분들을 살펴보겠습니다.
And let's take a look about the Anti-Room Prevent Act.
성폭력 처벌법 14조의 1, 2, 3항의 형량이 7년 이하에서 5천만 원, 3년 이상의 유기징역으로 대폭 상향되었습니다.
So the punishment went up to 7 years in imprisonment or impose a fine under 50 million won.
더욱 중요한 것은 이 뒤에 신설된 내용입니다.
And the most important is the new established paragraph.
네, 14조의 4항이 신설되었는데 촬영물을 소지, 구입, 저장, 시청하면 처벌받게 됩니다. 즉 촬영물 산업구조의 공급자뿐만이 아니라 수요자까지 처벌할 수 있는 것입니다.
So the new established is the 4th paragraph. And in the 4th paragraph, criminals who possess, purchase, download, watch will get punishment, which means in the industrial structure mentioned before, not only provider will be punished, but also the owner.
이것은 굉장히 중요한 개정이고 다양한 의미를 갖습니다. 그리고 5항에 상습 가중죄가 신설되었습니다.
And this is also the most important amendment in many meanings. Also, in the 5th paragraph, a criminal who commit the crime from the 1st paragraph to 3rd paragraph by habit will get the 1.5 aggravated punishment.
네, 또한 14조가 3개로 나눠져서 14조의 2와 14조의 3까지 만들어졌습니다. 14조의 2는 허위 영상물의 반포라고 해서 합성해서 만든 성착취 이미지에 대해서 처벌할 수 있는 법률입니다.
Also, the 14th article is divided into 1, 2, 3 paragraphs. And the second paragraph is talking about the spreading fake films or other actions, meaning the films are edited, photo montage, or processed in order to induce sexual desire or embarrassment.
14조의 3으로 촬영물을 이용해서 협박하거나 강요하면 처벌할 수 있는 법률이 신설됐습니다. 이렇게 14조가 과거에는 사망밖에 없었으나 지금의 14조는 굉장히 여러 가지 성폭력 유형을 처벌할 수 있는 법률로 확장되었습니다.
So the 14th article, the third paragraph, is using the films to threaten or coerce. And this means that the 14th article before it only has only 3 paragraphs, but now many types of sexual violence are included and it's expanded.
이번에는 아동청소년 성보호법의 개정 내용을 살펴보려고 하는데요. 전체적인 구성이 바뀌지는 않았지만 가장 중요하게는 음란물이라는 표현이 성착취물이라는 표현으로 대체되었습니다.
And now let's look at the sexual violence crime punishment with the children and the juvenile. This structure didn't amend too much, but most important is that the obscene materials words are changed to sexual exploitation.
그리고 형량도 전반적으로 상향되었습니다.
And the punishment also get more stricter.
이 법률은 온라인 그루밍에 대해서 처벌할 수 있는 법률로 바로 한 달 전에 만들어졌습니다.
Now I'm going to talk about the act that is 1 month ago amended to punish online grooming.
아동청소년 성착취 목적으로 정보통신망을 이용해 접근하면 처벌할 수 있고요. 또 한국 경찰들이 이런 상황에 대해서 위장 수사가 가능한 근거 법률이 함께 만들어졌습니다.
And so the Article 11 is talking about to product or spread children and juveniles targeted obscene materials. And also the police can go over and can go over and just and the criminal who commit the crime, and the police can protect himself, but not to be just go on. 계속하세요.
끝난 건가요?
네.
아하.
이거 맞는 것 같아요. 네.
네. 한국은 사이버 공간을 이용한 성폭력이 매우 심각하지만 페미니즘 리부트 이후에 수많은 여성들이 적극적으로 맞서 싸우면서 정부의 조치를 이끌어냈습니다.
So in Korea, the cyber-based sexual violence problem is very serious. But after feminism reboot, many women became active and fight for ourselves.
우리는 이런 자리들을 통해서 함께 힘을 모아 세계적 변화를 이끌어낼 것임을 믿습니다.
So we believe that we need to grab each other's hands to take action.
변화는 이미 시작되었습니다. 감사합니다.
And the change has begun. Thank you.
Thank you very much for President Song Hee-sao and the interpreter Ziyuan Li. Sorry to keep asking you to readjust the volume. Thank you very much. You paint a very clear picture for us, especially about the law enactment. I think all the participants and the audiences will have more questions. We'll come back to you later. And thank you very much. Now, next presenter will be Professor Gail Dynas. Is Gail here? Is Professor Dynas here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, Professor Dynas, let me give you the introduction first. Professor Gail Dynas is the Professor Emerita in Sociology and Women's Studies in Wheelock College. as we all know, she has written numerous books and articles talking about how porn has hijacked our cultures. Her book, Porn Land, How Porn Has Hijacked Our Sexuality, has been translated into 5 languages. And she will talk about the digital violence against women and girls. Now the floor is yours. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. Right, so my topic is going to be specifically around the porn industry and how it is a form of digital violence against women and girls. So today we now called child pornography child sexual abuse images. The name has changed virtually all over the world. Why did they change it from child pornography to child sexual abuse images? The reasons are children can't consent to pornography. It is a documentation of child sexual abuse. The image is a crime scene. Children are harmed on multiple levels by production, and all children are at risk by the distribution and consumption of child sexual abuse images. The core of my argument today is going to be that we have to rename pornography to women sexual abuse images, so it captures the reality of porn as the documentation, distribution, and consumption of violence against women. So again, I am arguing for a rename of pornography to what it really is, which is women's sexual abuse images. And I'm going to be focusing on today's mainstream industry. So just so you get a sense of the size of the porn industry today, porn sites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. Now, the main corporation that distributes the vast majority of porn in the world is called MindGeek. Now, MindGeek is hidden basically below ground. It puts itself out as an internet technology, head of SEOs. If you go on MindGeek website, you will not see the word porn anywhere, yet it distributes the vast majority of porn produced by the porn industry. And most importantly, it is the owner of Pornhub, which is the most trafficked porn website in the world. And Pornhub is one of the top 10 sites in the world. It's up there with Facebook, Google, and YouTube. So I just want you to get a sense of how large this industry is and how major Pornhub is. So some statistics from 2019. 42 billion visits in 1 year. That was up from 33 billion in 2018. Daily average of 100 million visitors, 962 searches a second. They uploaded in 2019 nearly 5 million new videos and created over 1 million hours of new content. There's already millions and millions of hours. Now, because there has been hearings in Canada about the role of porn, MindGeek in facilitating trafficking and using underage girls, they've actually taken down some of their videos. But before we applaud them and say how great they are, there are still millions and millions of videos up there. And the ones they've said they've taken down, like specifically with the word incest in, they've actually put in a different category called stepchild, stepdaughter, stepfather. So although they said they've taken down videos, they've hid them in another category. Now, what do we know about what's on porn sites? So this is a study by Anna Bridges that was in 2010, and they looked at 300 of the most watched porn scenes, and they found that 90% contained at least one form of violence against women. Now, Anna Bridges and a team have just updating this, and it's now not 90%, it's 100%. And anyone who's ever spent any time looking at pornography should not be surprised by this, because I myself have never seen in mainstream porn today images that do not contain violence against women. So let's get into Pornhub and see what the main sex acts are. Well, acts of violence, really. So in virtually every scene, you're going to see, first of all, gagging, which is a woman being gagged with a penis that's so far down her throat, she can't breathe. She starts to gag, the tears are streaming down her face, and just to make it a little bit more hot, they actually hold her nose. And sometimes she vomits, and they keep those vomiting scenes in. Strangulation. Now, strangulation is not gagging. Strangulation is hands around the throat. Very important difference. First of all, studies show that when women are strangled and when they're being battered, that they are more likely to die at the hands of their batterer. Number two, when you are strangled, it can take up from 5 to 7 days for it to show up. So you can, and I've seen this in pornography, where women are being strangled, hands around the throat, their eyes start to roll back and they virtually pass out. So you can pass out, wake up, think you're okay, go to bed 4 days later and die, because that's how long it takes for the passages to swell up. Very, very rough anal sex, to the point that they are pounding away at this woman. And one of the big problems for women in the porn industry is having anal prolapses, literally where their anuses drop out of their body, which is why most women in porn can only withstand 3 months because of the violence. Standard end of every porn scene is ejaculation on the face, where they ejaculate all over, and often 3, 4, or 5 men. And increasingly it's in the eye, to the point that before they had to close down because of COVID, there was an antibiotic resistant strain of gonorrhea of the eye going around the porn industry. Hair pulling, spanking, spitting in the face. So the average porn scene today on Pornhub is a woman being orally, anally, vaginally penetrated, being slapped, being spat in the face, being called every single name you can imagine, from bitch, whore to cum dumpster to more that I won't mention. This is your standard scene, and the end is ejaculate all over her face. This is violence against women. Those women on the porn set are being abused, sexually annihilated, and sex has become weaponized by the porn industry, which is why we need to call it what it is, which is images of documentation of violence against women. Now, porn is not considered violence against women because they, quote, consent. And we hear this over and over again. They consented, they consented, they consented. Well, let's begin to ask what this means. There is a kind of fetishization of consent, that somehow if she signed a contract, that makes everything okay. Now, there are economic, ideological, and legal motives to separate consensual porn from non-consensual porn. This is a strategy of the porn industry to legitimize itself, to separate consent from so-called non-consent. Now, the motive here is to make a false distinction between what is legitimate, the good guys, and not legitimate, the bad guys. So the bad actors, according to the porn industry, they use trafficked women, they use underage girls, they have revenge porn. And I just want to say, I totally understand why we need the term revenge porn as a legal term, but let's remember, pornography is revenge against all women as a sex class. Also, they argue that the bad actors force women into porn. So these are those over there, a few bad actors. And then the argument is the good actors, the legitimate porn industry, uses women who, quote, consent. They sign consent forms, they're over 18, and they find porn empowering. I have interviewed, I can't count how many women who have exited the porn industry. Not one of them says they were empowered. They all said they were repeatedly raped on the porn set and made to say they love it. So what is consent in a patriarchal society? This is a critical question. So let's really deconstruct and pull apart the notion of consent. So everybody, but especially women as a subordinate sex class, they consent under conditions of both opportunity and constraint. So let's have a look at what the conditions of constraints are. And these are often hidden. So we know that women who are in the porn industry are overwhelmingly poor, are often women of color. They have histories of sexual child abuse, histories of substance abuse. And if they didn't have substance abuse before they went in, then their pimps are to basically feed them all sorts of drugs. And to be honest, in order to survive on a porn set, you probably need all those drugs just to knock yourself out and not be present to the abuse that's happening to you. They are pimped out by what are called agents. Women in the porn industry call them suitcase pimps. These are men who basically travel around the porn industry looking for young women who they can pimp out to the porn industry. Now, the other constraint is sexual fraud. So let's talk about this, consent versus informed consent. When you go and have an operation, you have to sign an informed consent form. You can't just say, sign here to have the operation. They have to explain to you exactly what happens there and what could go wrong. Now, when you look at the consent forms of women in pornography, they say, will you do these acts, anal, double vaginal, ass to mouth, all of these things, and they sign. Now, first of all, we know that on the first day on the set, the first thing they do is they get the women to do a sex act they said they would not do, because that's how you break them. Secondly, the consent forms they sign are not informed consent. You have to explain everything that's going to happen. Are you willing to get possibly a antibiotic resistant strain of gonorrhea of the eye? Are you willing to get repeated anal prolapses? Are you willing to give your image up, probably make no money from it, never see any money, always be considered a slut or a whore? These images will live on after you die. You will never get it back. Are these the kinds of things you want to do? And remember, these are often young women with, as I say, histories of sexual abuse, substance abuse, and being pimped. So really, when we say consent, we do not know that these women have consented. The porn industry say they've consented, but are you going to listen to a bunch of predators who hate women and who also have a legal, absolute legal investment to say, well, she signed her consent form? So I would argue that we need to rethink the whole concept of consent, not just, by the way, in pornography, but also in the whole sex industry. Because I would argue that if you take away all of these things, how many women are truly going to put their hand up and say, yeah, I don't mind being in porn, I don't mind being prostituted, it is a choice I make. You cannot make a choice when all other choices have been ripped away from you. Now, the other bigger factor as well is the socialization of women and girls in patriarchy actually make them consent. And what I mean by that is the best way to explain this is a quote from Details magazine, where they quoted Joanna Angel. Now, Joanna Angel calls herself, quote, a feminist pornographer. I want to be very clear. You are either a feminist or a pornographer. You cannot be both. The first rule of feminism is do no harm to women. And pornography is the production and distribution of violence against women. So there's no way that term feminist and pornographer can go together. But she did say something very interesting. She said the girls these days, they just seem to come to the porn set porn ready. Now let's talk about what this means to have a porn ready. So what happens in our culture is we socialize our girls mainly through an image-based culture, where we tell them that you're either visible or invisible, and visibility is through looking, quote, fuckable. So it's fuckability versus invisibility. And these images of hypersexualization again and again thrown at these young women are indeed, as Joanna Angel said, making them porn ready. Now, Neil Postman, the very well-known media critic, said that when we lived in a print-based culture where the dominant form of communication was the printed word, we developed some immunization to the seduction of eloquence of the printed word. We have not developed any such immunization to the seduction of eloquence of the image. Images have a profound impact on the way that we socialize young women. And so when you're throwing images at them constantly to be hypersexed, to be pornified, to telling them this is what it means to be a woman in this culture, then of course they're going to be porn ready. And as one child rapist told me in prison, when he was in prison for raping his 10-year-old stepdaughter, and he was talking about grooming her, he looked me straight in the face when I was interviewing him, and he said, you know what? The culture did a lot of the grooming for me. So there's the child molester speaking exactly the same words as Joanna Angel. The culture en masse is grooming our girls en masse to see themselves as porn ready. So this is a way in which consent loses any meaningful reality, because how do you say no in a culture when you're told this is the only choice you have? So as Andrea Dworkin said, she said, think about pornography as social control, a democratic use of terrorism against all women, a way of saying to every woman, look down, bitch, because when you look up, you're going to see your legs spread. And of course, nobody ever said anything like Andrea Dworkin did. So what we're saying here is the documentation, monetization, distribution, and consumption of violence done to women by the porn industry reinforces, legitimizes, and celebrates women as a subordinate sex class in patriarchy. And that is because we have the best propaganda system in the world, which is violence against women, which is filmed, sold, distributed, and presented as entertainment. So we've created a toxic culture for women and girls. And especially the more image-based we are, the more toxic this culture has become, because the porn industry has cannibalized most of our imagery. So what do we want? The short-term goals. We want government legislation that defines women's sexual abuse images as non-state torture, which is exactly what it is. We want to hold sites accountable for the violence done to women and children in production and consumption, the withdrawal of all credit card payment systems, the end to corporate social responsibility approach of self-regulation by the porn sites. That they can self-regulate as a multi-billion-dollar industry is outrageous. So this is the same thing. To let them self-regulate is to let the tobacco industry self-regulate. Could you imagine me working for Philip Morris and Marlboro cigarettes, and I go outside schools and I hand out free cigarettes and I say, I'll be here the next day and the next day. Or I knock on people's houses and I say, excuse me, do you have a 12-year-old here or a 13-year-old? Because if you do, here's a packet of Marlboro cigarettes. Please give it to them. And by the way, I'll be back tomorrow and the day after and the day after. I would not be allowed to do that, because the industry is regulated. Yet we can hand out without question pornography to our kids minute by minute, day by day. And it goes into their bedroom, into the very intimate spaces where they live. So the fact that this industry, this above ground industry, is the only unregulated multi-billion-dollar industry is a complete sign of the absolute willfulness of governments all over the world to ignore the violence done to women and children in pornography. And of course, we want to enforce the above legislation, because there's no point in having legislation unless you enforce it. So the long-term goal is we regulate this industry out of existence. We make it almost impossible for them to produce by having a whole series of laws, and we make it almost impossible for them to distribute through a whole series of legal systems. Now, I am not naive. I know that no government is going to do this out of the goodwill for women. It is going to take feminists, and I mean feminists who are anti-porn, who understand the sex industry as sexual exploitation, who do not argue that sex work or the term sex work is in any way empowerment. There is no such thing as sex work. It is sexual exploitation. It is going to take feminists who absolutely understand that pornography and the whole of the sex industry is violence against women to force governments to do something. And the way we do that is we have massive awareness campaigns, protests, whatever it takes. We dismantle this image abuse industry brick by brick. That is our job. And you know what? Any which way we can. This is called the Gulliver strategy. We take this monster and we tie it down piece by piece. Now, absolutely legislation, regulation, and also we argue a public health approach. I run an organization, I'm president of Culture Reframed, where we take the public health approach, where we argue that pornography is the public health crisis of the digital age. If we care about women and children, which to all data today suggests we really don't, but for those of us who do, it is time to adult up It is time to reclaim feminism from those who would argue that pornography is empowering, is an act of choice, is agency. We have to take back feminism from those faux feminists, and we have to start organizing once again to say that this industry is nothing more in its production and distribution, the violence against women and children, and we will no longer allow it. So we have to declare war on the porn industry and say, no matter what happens, we are coming after you and we are going to close you down. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Professor Dinas. You made a very strong case about, let me see if my voice, can you hear my voice? Okay. You made a very strong case about why there's no women's consensus in porn industry. You talk about you cannot make choice when all the choices are ripped away from you, especially we're facing such a totally unregulated industry. And you lay out the short-term goals and long-term goals. Thank you very much. We'll get back to you. I think you have, when we look at the chat board, you have encouraged a lot of participants and audience. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to say, to announce that Mr. Rob Spector couldn't make it today because he has technical difficulties to access to the forum. So we will not be able to have him with us today. So now we come to our last presenter. Last but not least, let's welcome Professor Nicola Henry. Professor Henry is a social legal scholar with over 20 years research experience in the sexual violence field. She's currently lead chief investigator on Australian Research Council Discovery Project on image-based sexual abuse. She has co-authored with Paul Well on the book called Sexual Violence in a Digital Age. And she also co-edited a book with other scholars. The title is Image-Based Sexual Abuse, a study of the causes and consequences of non-consensual nude or sexual image. Tonight, Professor Henry will talk about the digital violence against women and girls, the Australian context. The floor is yours, Professor Henry.
Okay, can you hear me?
No problem, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Before I will begin, I would like to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, including their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge today that I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri land. And it's important to acknowledge that Indigenous sovereignty has never been ceded in this country and we're living on stolen land. So my name is Nicola Henry. I'm an Associate Professor and Australian Research Council Future Fellow in the Social and Global Studies Centre at RMIT University in Melbourne, Australia. I'm thrilled to be at this roundtable with you all and grateful to be participating in these important discussions on empowering women and girls and working towards the goal of gender equality in an ever-changing world. Okay, so today I'll be speaking about image-based sexual abuse and what is happening in the Australian context. So I'll just give you a brief definition of image-based sexual abuse, first of all. We refer to that according to three key behaviours. One is the non-consensual taking or creation of nude or sexual images. The second is the non-consensual sharing or distribution of images. And the third is making threats to share nude or sexual images. These can include a range of different behaviours. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples here. One is the recording or distribution. Sorry, I don't think my slides are playing, are they? Let me just try this. Sorry, there we go. The recording or distribution of sexual assault images, threats made to share images in the context of domestic violence, illicitly obtaining images through computer hacking into webcams or gaining access to computer files, so-called sextortion scams involving blackmail to elicit images, money, or unwanted sexual acts, creep shots or secret recordings of intimate acts or up women's skirts, also known as upskirting or downblousing. Another example is the trading of non-consensual images online for the purposes of revenge or for social status, monetary gain, or sexual gratification. And another example, of course, that's already been discussed tonight is the use of artificial intelligence or some other software to create what's known as fake pornography, or also known as deep fakes. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the research that my team and I conducted in 2019. We did a survey of over 6,000 respondents aged between 16 and 64 in the UK, in Australia and New Zealand. So just in relation to a couple of key findings, I won't have time to talk about all of those findings, but I just want to talk about victimisation. We found that 1 in 3 respondents in our survey said that they'd had at least one experience of image-based abuse. This included 1 in 3 that said that someone had taken images of them without their consent. That's nude or sexual images. We found that 1 in 5 said that someone had shared nude or sexual images without their consent. And we found that just under 1 in 5 said that someone had made threats to share a nude or sexual image of them. Young people were twice as likely as those aged 40 to be victims of image-based sexual abuse, with those aged between 20 and 29 to be the most likely group to be victims. Men and women reported, interestingly, a similar frequency of victimisation. However, women said that they'd experienced higher levels of harm from the abuse, including being more than twice as likely as men to report being fearful for their safety from the perpetrator. We found that lesbian, gay, bisexual women experienced the greatest health, relational and harassing impacts than other groups. And we also found that lesbian, gay and bisexual women experienced higher levels of victimisation compared to their heterosexual counterparts. Finally, we found that New Zealand Māori, Australian Indigenous and Black, Asian and minority ethnicities had higher rates of image-based abuse victimisation. What's also interesting is the rates of image-based abuse are very similar across Australia, the UK and New Zealand. So this is just a very quick sketch of the extent and scope of image-based abuse. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go into more detail because now I want to turn to examining the role of Australian law in addressing this growing problem. So to begin with, all Australian jurisdictions, with the exception of Tasmania, have introduced new criminal offences in relation to image-based abuse. Although the wording in each jurisdiction differs slightly and there are different penalties, overall the sharing or distribution of intimate images without consent can attract criminal penalties of up to 3 years imprisonment in Australian states and territories, and 3 years for making threats to share intimate images. The federal telecommunications legislation was also amended in August 2018, and that introduces a special aggravated criminal offence for the non-consensual distribution of private sexual material of a person over the age of 18. That federal criminal offence attracts a prison sentence of up to 5 years, or in some cases 7 years in the most serious cases where an accused person has already had 3 civil penalty orders made against them. And currently before Parliament, they're proposing to amend that legislation to increase the penalty from 5 years to 6 years. And I think this does recognise the serious nature of image-based sexual abuse. Australia has some of the most advanced legislative responses to image-based abuse globally. In nearly all jurisdictions where law reform was undertaken, including at the federal level, there was an extensive public consultation period, and the legislators seem to be taking on board the advice and guidance from victim survivors, from academics, from domestic and sexual violence support services, legal practitioners, and others, and have to some extent avoided some of the problems that have been identified in relation to international jurisdictions where the laws are quite restrictive and fail to provide justice to people who have experienced image-based abuse. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about some examples of some good aspects of the Australian legislation. So first of all, no Australian jurisdiction with those specific image-based abuse laws require that the prosecution prove that the victim suffered distress or harm, or that the perpetrator intended to cause distress. or harm. Now, in some countries, such as New Zealand, the UK, and also in some US jurisdictions, there is that requirement. So if a perpetrator didn't intend to cause harm, so for instance, if their motivation wasn't revenge, but it was to obtain sexual gratification or to share the images as a laugh between their friends, and in those jurisdictions, they would not be able to be prosecuted. In Australia, that's different because there is no requirement to that the perpetrator intended to cause harm or distress. The other thing that's really important to note is that in Australian jurisdictions, the threat to share nude or sexual images is a criminal offence. Now, in some countries, it is not a criminal offence. In Australia, the maximum penalties range from 2 to 3 years for someone making a threat to share images. And also the Australian law states that it's irrelevant whether or not the images actually exist. So for example, in domestic violence contexts, you have perpetrators who are threatening to share images, but those images might not even exist. Under Australian criminal law, that would still be a criminal offence. Third, more recently introduced criminal offences in some Australian jurisdictions include wording that make it clear that digitally altered images, including deep fakes, that is images that are created, fake pornography that's created using artificial intelligence, is actually covered under some Australian criminal laws. And again, that's in contrast to many other countries where that is just not covered at all. Finally, I just want to mention in one Australian jurisdiction, so that's in the New South Wales, recently in October last year, the government in New South Wales passed a new law that gives the court greater powers to order an offender to remove, retract, delete or destroy an intimate image. The other interesting thing for the New South Wales laws is that it gives victims the same rights as sexual assault complainants. So it allows image-based abuse complainants to give evidence remotely in closed court, to access a support person, to have their identity protected from publication, and also to avoid cross-examination by an unrepresented accused person. The laws on image-based abuse are not consistent across Australian states and territories. And unfortunately, there are lots of gaps in terms of how the laws are being applied in practice. So first, despite that high prevalence rate that I mentioned a few slides ago, there have actually been only a small number of prosecutions under the recently introduced laws, and there's low reporting figures, again, in contrast to the high prevalence of image-based abuse. Second, in some Australian jurisdictions, image-based abuse is classified as what's called a summary offence, and this is seen as a lesser offence to what's known as an indictable offence. So when image-based abuse is classified as a summary offence, it limits law enforcement's responses, including the power of arrest. It limits their ability to be able to apply for a search warrant and to seize devices. And police have told us in interviews that they're more likely to prosecute image-based abuse when they can connect it to another more serious offence, such as stalking. Another key challenge in relation to the implementation and application of image-based laws relates to policing in cross-jurisdictional context with external enforcement agencies. And again, in relation to those police interviews that we have conducted, police have said that they've had positive experiences working across international jurisdictions in relation to child sexual abuse material. However, when we asked them about working collaboratively with police in other countries, they said that they'd probably not investigate offences involving adults unless children were also involved. So things may have changed since those set of interviews, but it obviously represents a massive barrier. A key challenge for police also concerns knowledge of the laws and harms. So we heard from victim survivors. We interviewed 75 victim survivors of image-based abuse, and we also interviewed stakeholders again in the UK, New Zealand and Australia. And we found that a lot of people said that police advised the victims that there was nothing that they could do, and they often provide quite unhelpful advice, such as telling the victims to turn their phone off or to deactivate their social media accounts. And participants in our study also mentioned that police often just had no knowledge of any of these laws that exist in relation to image-based abuse in the Australian context. Finally, some stakeholders in our study spoke about how traditional masculine values and victim-blaming attitudes and a general lack of understanding of gendered violence contributed to how image-based abuse was policed. Although some victims had positive experience with police, the majority of the 75 victim survivors that we interviewed who not all the 75 victim survivors, of course, had experience with police, but those who did described the police as, quote, disinterested, dismissive, cruel, and judgmental. So just to give you one example, Heather, which is a pseudonym, a victim survivor participant from the UK, in her words, the case officer I was given came around 2 days later after I reported the image-based abuse, and they took my first statement. So I had to tell them everything that happened, and they instantly victim blamed me for what had happened. The police officer said, well, I guess you've learnt your lesson. I felt like if the police didn't have any sympathy or anything, then nobody else probably would either. So it made me feel really bad. And I had to get my friend to come over that night because I felt really unsafe in myself. I thought I'd probably harm myself. I dreaded every phone call from the police officer because I found her so unhelpful. I'm just going to talk now about the Australian Office of the E-Safety Commissioner. This was formerly known as the Office of the Children's E-Safety Commissioner. It's an independent statutory body that's created by legislation. It's been in operation since 2015 in Australia, and the E-Safety Commissioner is essentially a world first. The E-Safety Office coordinates and leads the online safety efforts of government, industry and the not-for-profit community, and has a broad remit, and this includes first providing a complaint service for young Australians who experience serious cyberbullying. Second, the E-Safety Commissioner identifies and removes illegal online content. Third, they address image-based abuse, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and they also provide research and education. Interestingly too, the E-Safety Commissioner was given responsibility for developing a world-first national online image-based abuse portal, which helps to counter the effects of sharing intimate material without consent. And that image-based abuse portal went live in October 2017. It helps victim survivors to get their images removed from online sites. It gives them guidance on how to communicate with someone who has intimate images in their possession. It gives advice to victim survivors on collecting evidence, and it also provides advice on the applicable laws in their jurisdiction. And the E-Safety Office can work with victim survivors to help request that images be removed from online service providers and website hosts and providers. So in the final few minutes how many minutes have I got? Final 3 minutes, I think I have, or 4 minutes. I just want to talk about some civil remedies. So I've already talked about the introduction of new criminal offences on image-based abuse in the Australian context. And I just need to mention that although the criminal law is only one particular justice avenue and is inherently limited, it does nonetheless represent an important first step in acknowledging the harms of these behaviours. As I mentioned, unfortunately, too often these laws are not being used in the way that they were intended because police are often unaware of the provisions or do not view image-based abuse as serious enough to proceed with an investigation. So there are some other options though for victim survivors. They can institute civil proceedings under, for example, anti-discrimination law, defamation law, copyright law, and so on. Now, these are also very important to have in place, but unfortunately there are a number of limitations. And I'm not going to talk too much about this today, but just to say that there are significant costs for civil litigation for victim survivors who might not have the means to bring a civil action against a perpetrator. And there's also the inherent inability of civil proceedings to stop the spread of intimate images once they've been distributed online. So in response to some of these shortcomings of the criminal and the civil justice systems here in Australia, the federal government introduced an innovative civil penalties scheme in 2018. The civil penalties scheme specifically prohibits the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, as well as the threats to share intimate images. Under this scheme, the Australian Office of the E-Safety Commissioner has investigatory powers to administer to administer a complaints and objections system in relation to image-based abuse. This means that any victim of image-based abuse or an authorised person can report their experiences to the E-Safety Commissioner. The E-Safety Commissioner can then issue formal warnings, enforceable undertakings, infringement notices, or seek an injunction, or they may also issue civil penalties for non-compliance. So just to give you an example of the civil penalties, the E-Safety Commissioner, for example, can issue a takedown notice to an individual user or a corporation requiring that they remove the images within 48 hours. Individuals who fail to comply with the takedown notice may be fined up to 105,000 Australian dollars, and corporations face fines of up to 525,000 Australian dollars. In 2021, so very, very recent, a new online safety bill was passed through the Senate, the Australian Senate, with bipartisan support. And I'm just going to speak very briefly about the online safety bill. The aim of the proposed law is to improve and promote online safety for Australians, including children and adults, and to provide victims of harmful communications with a quick and efficient means of redress. This online safety bill will enhance the powers of the E-Safety Commissioner and will increase the responsibility and accountability for industry, including technology companies and digital platforms, with civil penalties in place for individual users and online servers that fail to comply with the removal notices. Essentially, the proposed online safety bill updates 4 already existing schemes in relation to cyberbullying, in relation to image-based abuse, which I've already spoken about, in relation to online content, and also in relation to abhorrent violent material. So, for example, in relation to cyberbullying, the cyberbullying scheme has been expanded. It enables the removal of material from a much broader range of online services beyond social media platforms. So that also includes, for example, gaming and messaging sites. And it's also reduced the amount of time that's required to remove those images from 48 hours now down to 24 hours. I've already mentioned the image-based abuse scheme that has been slightly updated from the 2018 model. So it's been proposed that it will, instead of 48 hours, individual users and corporations will be given 24 hours to make sure that that content is removed. And in addition to those 4 existing schemes, I've only spoken briefly about cyberbullying and image-based abuse, but I want to mention that there's a 5th scheme that's been proposed, which is a world-first cyber abuse takedown scheme for Australian adults. And this is essentially similar to the other schemes where online services will be required to remove content within 24 hours after they receive a notice from the E-Safety Commissioner, and with civil penalties attached to end users and also to technology companies for failure to comply with a removal notice. There are a bunch of other things that are quite interesting about the proposed Online Safety Act, which I won't go into detail here, except to say that online services will be required to provide regular reports about online harms and how they're upholding certain basic online safety expectations. Most organisations, including Google and Facebook and Twitter and so on, would probably agree that some kind of regulatory framework is important to deal with online harms, including image-based abuse. However, with the Online Safety Bill, there have been some concerns that have been expressed. So first of all, the bill was rushed through Parliament without proper consultation. And second, some have argued that it gives the E-Safety Commissioner too much power to order the removal of content to be deemed R18+ or higher, and to order that sites or apps be blocked if they fail to comply. So sex workers, for instance, who use online work are concerned that their content will be banned or removed from platforms because the proposed law could allow users to complain about any sexual material online. But as far as the image-based abuse scheme is concerned, which is what I'm mostly focusing on in my research, while it is far from perfect, of course, and we're yet to see how it's going to work in practice, what I want to finish on here is to outline what victim survivors say are the key priorities. And this is based on the 75 interviews that we've conducted with victim survivors in New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. So first, victim survivors want greater recognition of the wrongfulness of the perpetrator's actions and of the harms they experience. They also want platforms and technology companies to be held accountable for hosting non-consensual images and other harmful content on their sites. Third, victim survivors want a suite of justice options available to them. Fourth, they want better education on image-based abuse that squarely deals with gender inequality, consent and respectful relationships education. Fifth, they want better access to technological support as well as psychological support and guidance. And to end, perhaps most importantly, victim survivors want to reclaim control rather than necessarily retribution. And almost without exception, their key priority is having the content removed or taken down. Thank you very much for having me today, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Henry. I think we do share a lot of similar problems, and we face the similar situations here. And I do believe the NGO members here are very interested in the online e-safety measures you mentioned. So we'll have more dialogues in the future. Thank you. So we still have like 13 minutes left. Near the end, we'll all hold a card and take a photo together, okay? And before then, let's see if we have any questions from participants, from presenters, and our participants. I do find one question tailored to Gail. Did you see the questions on the chat board? The audience, one of the audience asked you, do you agree with a tri-party approach targeting production, distribution, and consumption of pornography?
Yeah, I think that's the only way, is that you have to think of the whole value chain from production right through to distribution. And actually, there's on that value chain, it starts with production, but you also need to include what are called webmasters, payment systems, going after Visa and MasterCard for them processing abuse of violence against women in pornography. So I would say we expand it and we go after each person on the value chain, which is how you make it just impossible to produce and distribute. And I could, think of 10 different groups, because the pornography industry is a very complicated industry with numerous players, many of whom are hidden and you wouldn't know.
It's a big news here in Taiwan. I mean, it invites a lot of discussion when the credit card system stopped the collaboration with the porn hub at the States. So we people here consider that as a great measure to maybe help to stop the impact of this kind of porn industry. So I don't know if President Seoul has anything to share with us about the case in Korea, because the nth room case in Korea, I mean, how the production, distribution, and consumption of this kind of porn. I mean, it's not really porn, but unsolicited, the revenge porn, the personal sexual image, okay, distributed on the nth room. So how would you react to Gail's opinions? Yes.
텔레그램뿐만이 아니라 다른 플랫폼들을 통해서 이 N번방 피해자분들의 촬영물들이 아주 적극적으로 사고 팔렸는데요.
Yes, not only in the Telegram chat room, also in other platforms, this kind of sexual abuse and sexual violence videos are like spreading around.
특히 그 서버를 한국 외의 나라에 두고 있는 불법 포르노 사이트들의 유통이 아주 적극적이고 대규모였습니다.
And also the cyber are based in not in Korea, so the cyber violence has been very big and very serious.
서버를 해외에 두고 있는.
네, the server is based is not in Korea, it's in other country.
서버만 해외에 두고 있을 뿐이지 한국인이 운영하고 한국인 이용자들이 이용하고 한국어로 서비스합니다.
그 서버는 the server is outside Korea, but the Korean people, they use and they consume and they spread the video.
최근에 발견했었던 양상 중에 중요한 것은 중국 불법 포르노 사이트들이 굉장히 대규모로 발달을 하고 있고 거기에 텔레그램 성착취 피해자분들 영상들도 많이 발견되었습니다.
Recently, they find out that in the China porn site, there are Korean victims in the China porn site. Yeah.
So what you are talking about is actually it's beyond the reach of the legal force in South Korea because the servers are always located overseas, right? I think we face the similar challenge here in Taiwan. So Fang Jun would like to give your thoughts on this matter.
I would like to further this question too. Professor Henry just talked a little bit about how police in Australia work with international jurisdiction. I guess it's about the same kind of questions. Could Professor Henry, if you know anything about these, just how police in Australia deal with this kind of problems when the victims' videos are out there in some foreign porn site and it's very difficult to remove for the local law enforcement?
Yeah, thank you for that question. As I said, the police in interviews that we conducted said that they're not very likely to work collaboratively with police in other jurisdictions. If we're talking about image-based abuse against adults, they're more likely to work across borders with overseas police in relation to child sexual abuse material. So that is a problem. However, in saying that, I am aware of a recent case where the perpetrator wasn't an Australian citizen. He had been in a relationship with a woman in the UK. They broke up. He returned to Australia. And then from Australia, he sent her husband back in the UK some videos of her performing a sexual act with him and made some threats. And I'm not sure if he actually shared them on pornography websites. But in that particular case, the Australian Federal Police did work collaboratively with the UK police. And so I think we're starting to see some more examples of that kind of collaboration across jurisdictions in relation to image-based abuse against adults. But I still think we've got a very far way to go. I think that there's a huge, big challenge in terms of policing image-based abuse and often, it's not just the perpetrator and victim being both located in one country. Sometimes it's, in all sorts of different locations.
Can I say something, please? So I think what's interesting here is that all the speakers have spoken, given different examples, but the sort of context for this is a patriarchal society that allows for violence against women and children, whether it's in digital form, physical form, the physical form that turns into digital form, etc. And I think the question here as well has to be is how, as feminists, are we going to organize against this global war on women? And certainly the digital violence against women and children is one slice of it that all of us are coming at from different perspectives. But I do think the context of this is a much more macro issue, a global issue, and a point, and the obvious outcome of any society that is patriarchal in nature. You put technology in a patriarchal society, and what you're going to get? You're going to get violence against women and children. And let's be very clear, the perpetrators are almost always men, and the victims are almost always women and children. So I think it's really important to give a sex-based analysis of this as well. And that should be part of our solution.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially it's a technology facilitated global war against women and girls.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have one participant ask about the panelists about the statistics of the sex from the aggressors versus the sex from the victims from each country. I think here in Taiwan, obviously, in terms of the victims, most of the digital violence victims, the victims of digital sexual crimes are biologically women. Can I say that? So I think, I don't know if that's the case at States and Australia. And yeah, so this is a question from the audience. So regarding the questions raised by Gail about this patriarchal system and technologically facilitated and accentuate the crimes. I don't know, each panelist, any one of you would like to propose some kind of more robust measures, how we can put together our efforts to conquer this, or any proposal, any thoughts on this?
Do you want me to just quickly answer the question about the statistic? I'll be super quick. We also asked our respondents in our survey about perpetration, and we found that men, not unsurprising of course, men and younger people were more likely to self-report being perpetrators. So we had men at 22.3% compared to women at 13.1%. And of course, this is self-reported perpetration, so we have to interpret those figures cautiously, but it does demonstrate what we already suspect, that that we already know, sorry, that men are more likely to be perpetrators of image-based abuse.
Well, my position was more looking at mainstream porn and how we regulate that. And I have to say, a lot of what we're seeing is flowing from the pornography industry. When you think that the average age of boys first viewing this pornography is 11, what they're doing is they're actually encoding it into their sexual template. It makes perfect sense that they're going to then go on and digitally abuse women and girls. So I do think that one big step is, as I say, we regulate the porn industry out of existence so that we are not training the next generation of boys to to weaponize technology against girls, which is what pornography is weaponization of technology against women and girls using sex as the vehicle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here in Taiwan, sexting, like for young people, but they exchange like nude photos. They imitate all these kind of images online or from mainstream media, and to exchange this kind of pictures and messages with explicitly sexual images. So this is one example of how Gail portrays. And for this kind of unsolicited sexual abuse, sexual images, they kind of fill the industry, porn industry, especially this kind of immature porn is very popular nowadays. I mean, Taiwan, in other places globally, not professionally made, but immature porn is kind of special genre of the porn industry. So
porn
this is what happened here in Taiwan.
I'm sorry. Amateur
yeah,
porn.
Go ahead.
Amateur porn is actually made by the porn industry. It's actually a subsection of the porn industry, specializing to look amateur. So it's homemade versus amateur. But again, what you said, I mean, sexting. You know, we know from studies that anything from sometimes 60 to 80% of girls who are sexting are actually being bullied and harassed into it. This is not, again, consensual sexting. So, and then the question becomes, again, how have we socialized our girls and boys into thinking that there is no limits to the body, there's no bodily integrity, and that everybody has a right to see you? And when girls sext, they sext from the face down. When boys send nude pictures of themselves, they send it from the chin down. So one penis looks like the next, basically. So you can't figure out who the boy is, but you certainly can figure out who the girl is.
thank you all because actually we run out of time. So hopefully we can build a link among us and engage in more talks and actions in the near future. And before we end this session, everybody has made this card, so we can raise the card and take the photos for all the panelists. Gail, you have one?
No, I put it in my my PowerPoint. I'm sorry.
Yeah, slides, right? You put in your slides. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. For those of you, maybe you just raise your hand, okay? So for those of us who have this paper card, please raise the card and take the photos. Okay. Okay. Kevin, can we do? Okay. 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 So, thank you all. It's it's midnight. It's 36 past midnight in Taiwan. And Nicola, what time is it at Australia?
It's
Professor
25.
Harry?
It's nearly 4 a.m.
Oh, thank
Good
you
job,
so
Nicola.
much.
You're still awake.
I'm surprised I'm still awake,
Yeah,
but yeah,
hard
doing
to
quite
believe.
well.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Sorry
Thank
for
you.
dragging
Thank you
everybody
for
together and
organising.
spend the night together.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and hope we can keep in touch and work together.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thanks. Thank you so much.